So, hello, everybody. It looks like we're live, and hopefully that means you can hear me. I can't hear you, but I don't think they have that feature yet. Maybe they do. Anyway, today I want to talk about a subject, the subject of interviews. And I was thinking of this because I really had no idea what to talk about today. I usually don't, but today was a particularly funny one where I just thought, well, I have no idea what musical subject to talk about on this stream. And then someone sent me a clip of an interview that I'd already seen. I'd seen the whole interview, but they sent me this clip, and it was a clip of Neil Schon from Journey explaining to Rick Beato how he played the coda section, that famous coda section of the song Stone in Love from Journey's Escape album. And it was obviously a great segment of what was a really great interview that Rick did with Neil sometime in San Francisco over the previous few weeks. And this got me to think more generally, why do we love hearing musicians interviewed? At least, why do some of us love hearing musicians interviewed? And there's a lot to talk about there because as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, there's definitely more than one reason that we want to hear musicians interviewed. Now, let's consider this. Some musicians love giving interviews. Think of Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa's interviews are so well renowned that some people who don't even care for or understand his music actually love seeing him interviewed. In fact, I was told this by someone who really couldn't get into the music, maybe over his head or something. A Zappa fan like me would say that, but loved to hear Zappa talk about free speech and politics and the music industry and other various social trends and problems more widely. And then there's some musicians at the opposite end of the spectrum who, usually because of bad experiences with journalists, they don't really give interviews at all. And the artist formerly known as Prince or whatever we're supposed to call him. Now in the afterlife, Cosmic Man, he hated interviews. And of course, there's many musicians in between. Generally, the more political a musician is, the more they tend to like giving interviews, but not exclusively. There's many different reasons musicians will give interviews, some out of a sense of obligation to a record company or a publicist, and others because they genuinely like chatting about music. Richie Blackmore, kind of shy about interviews, but he is a practical joker. So when he does give interviews, he can be quite amusing. So why do we, though, why do we, the audience for these types of things, like to hear these interviews? Well, there's several reasons, and I'll start with the one that has become most prevalent in the age of the internet. Now, before the internet, when we saw a journalist, we typically thought of Kermit the Frog in a trench coat and a brown hat. But today, journalism is a much more broad and varied and diverse field. And I say that in the real sense of the word, not in the sense of the word that they want you to hear it in. And by that, I mean, people are conducting journalism on their own. They're doing it independently. They're not beholden to corporate sponsors. They're not necessarily beholden to big political style donors. They're not even beholden to a general format where, you've got to cram in music, weather, sports, top news, violent news, happy news, all within sort of 25 minutes plus a few commercials because, Mike's Mattress Company will give you 50% off limited time only this Black Friday. We don't really hear that a lot in the modern world. I mean, the older folks who might still watch regular TV do, but here in the world of the internet, even the commercials, either the ones that are human ad reads or the ones that are tailored by AI, they tend to be focused on the likes or dislikes of the audience. So if you're watching a show about music, you might see an ad for Rhino Records or for a guitar pedal or for headphones or for things like that, as opposed to your general television where the show might be, a repeat of VH1's Yield behind the music, and you'll have your side effects of Viagra ad followed by your life insurance ad followed by a brand new Hyundai. So there you go. The internet is it's a more personal place, even though people would argue that it's made our interactions more impersonal. And so where was I going with this? Oh yes, journalism. Kermit the Frog in a trench coat and a brown hat. So today, journalism is much more specialized. And for all that we criticize about legacy mainstream journalism, independent journalism is going through something of a golden age. And music is one of the places where this manifests itself because you can get people who love a genre of music or an artist or a group of artists who might have been totally ignored by the TV and the MTV, but because they have a large enough following, maybe not large enough for Pepsi Cola to sponsor a show about them on the MTV, but large enough for a group of committed people or a group of professionals to say, look, we want to talk about such and such genre, such and such musician, and we are going to interview them. And sometimes these kinds of journalists and educators become as big as anyone. I mean, look at Rick Beato, the sort of king of online music education and journalism. His interviews are more lengthy, more detailed, and more musically orientated than anything that you would have gotten from the old networks, from a newspaper, from the MTV, from any of that. And yet the ratings that he gets are right up there with what these TV stations and cable stations were getting back when that was a format without much competition. And this shows you several things, and I've said this before in other contexts, it applies in this context too. Do not second guess your audience. Do not even try to guess who your audience is. I mean, people in business, what are your audience segments? What are your audience segments? Well, I don't know. I'm going to put out a product or a service and we'll see from there who uses it, because you cannot really accurately predict. You can to a degree. If you're making baby food, it will probably be sold to the very young and the very old, while the middle aged will prefer a more carnivorous diet requiring teeth. But when it comes to things like art, music, it's really difficult to predict. And Rick Beato is that proof of concept, as they call it. He is the proof that if you respect your audience and expose them to new things and or expose them to things they've always wanted but never think they could get from traditional media sources, they'll flock to you. And his extended interviews with musicians varying from, Steve Lukather and Neil Schon to Keith Jarrett and Ron Carter, so many genres. John Anderson, Peter Frampton were very early ones. Dave Gilmour of Pink Floyd, so many in between. Um, um Skunk Baxter, who's got an interesting story and a great musician. And those are just a few. He's interviewed so many and continues to do so. That shows that in among people who would have otherwise been stuck with VH1 and a cup of bull juice, it is now the world is open. We can see these long form interviews that skip the gossip, skip the personal stories, and are all about music. Why do you play this kind of instrument? Why do you use these effects pedals? What studio techniques did you use? What tape recorders did you use? What was it like touring with this band? What inspires you to write music? What music did you listen to as a kid? Did you have music lessons as a kid? These are the kinds of journalistic questions that, tried and true day and night, 7-Eleven, news, music journalist junkies, if you will, want to hear. And people like Rick Beato give it to us. So I think that one of the reasons today, to answer this grand question that I'm going for, that people are into music interviews, is because we're living through a golden age of them, because the internet has made it so that the interview can take whatever shape or size the journalist and the audience who's usually synced up with that journalist wants. And again, Beato is just probably the best example, but of many that we see on the interwebs today. So that's the first reason. Second reason, we're going to go a bit more psychological. Ooh, spooky. And this is that an interview with a musician sometimes breaks the third wall. Now, what's the third wall? Well, it's a term from the theater. And what it means is that there's an area between, and it's invisible, by the way. I told you, we're getting, well, yeah, it's a bit cosmic, but there's this theoretical idea that between the stage and the audience is this invisible wall. And this invisible wall is sort of a metaphor for suspending belief, so that we know that in the audience, our seats are uncomfortable, the cup holders are insufficient, there's someone coughing 3 rows back, there might even be a baby crying somewhere in the theater. But on the other side of this third wall, this this invisible third wall is a world of fantasy, a world where the characters are real, a world where, someone flying on a string across the stage is really flying, a world where anything the playwright or musical composer wants, the operatic librettist, anything they want us to believe is believable. And this sort of exists in music performances as well, even though the concept is more thespian than musician. We see when musicians are on stage, they are putting together an artistic statement. And we in the audience, however we think that the air conditioning isn't turned up high enough, or that, again, the seats are uncomfortable, we're focused on the music. And so long as the music itself is able to hold our attention, we're able to suspend belief about the environment around us and focus in terms of our sensorial apparatus and in terms of our sort of consciousness on the music being performed on stage. And it's a very interesting and fun, some would say magical experience. Now, why would we want to break that third wall? Well, we wouldn't necessarily want to do it during a performance, but during an interview, we would want to do it to find out the secrets. Because, well, some people like to, not find out how, the man pulled the rabbit from the hat. If you're an aspiring magician or simply are interested in the technique and the mechanics of how something is done, you might want to know. And that's sort of what interviews can be as well. It's pulling back the curtain, it's eliminating that third wall and hearing, oh, yeah, that thing I did on my guitar that sounds crazy and, so different than what a regular guitar off the shelf at your local music store would sound like. Well, I did it because I plugged it into this pedal and had it run through this synthesizer and did such and such. And, do you know why did John Bonham's drums have that sound? Oh, because the microphones that were miking up all of the drums in a close miking situation were running through a Boss phaser, and you turn up the effect, that phasing effect, and you get that sort of whooshing sound on John Bonham's drums. And these sorts of interviews that sort of break that third wall can help people who are interested in reverse engineering the magic, if you will. It can help them gain a better understanding. And this segues into water break. This segues into another element that I think is very important, which is the educational element. And like I said, Rick Beato is someone who combines journalism and education, and there's a fine line because both are about conveying information, journalism in a more general sense, education in a more didactic sense. But nevertheless, it's about the conveyance of information. And these video interviews are very important for music education, some more than others. Some actually sort of become tutorials. You might see Pat Metheny slowly and methodically playing something he did, Rick Wakeman explaining what he did on the organ and roundabout, as he did on one of Rick Beato's interviews, etc. And this is very important because obviously people want to learn music. And if you want to learn to be better, why not learn from the best? Now, just the other day on the Joe Rogan show, Adam Carolla said something really interesting. I think I love Carolla, always have. He said that the best people in a particular field don't necessarily make the best instructors. And I thought that was very interesting because he mentioned that he would occasionally go to sort of courses that were fighting courses, boxing courses that were sort of taught by champions at their various weight levels. And he said, yeah, these people could do it. They have the credentials, but they don't really know how to explain it. And Carolla explained to Rogan that, well, he never sort of won a world championship. He was a bit of an amateur boxer in his youth. He was really good at teaching people how to box because he was able to explain it, muster the appropriate metaphors to get the message into people's heads. And this is true with music as well. Some great musicians cannot even begin to explain why or what they did. Some don't even remember. And that's not a drug reference. We've made a few of those already. It's just a reference that that alludes to the fact that some people have different kinds of memories. I don't remember what I did yesterday. I know I did something, but I don't remember what it was. And so there's these types of things as well. And so these interviews can sort of sometimes help bridge the gap. If, for instance, you have someone who is a very articulated educator, again, going back to Rick, versus a musician who might not be able to easily articulate it, sometimes a great interviewer can bring out the articulation, the verbal, as opposed to, on an instrument, because we have something in music called articulation. Anyway, they can bring that out of their subject, if you will. more readily than, let's say, someone just doing one of those master classes that you used to see a lot in the age of VHS and Laserdisc video. So let's just recap because again, I haven't really thought any of this through, but I think it's interesting. So one, there's the journalistic aspect, which, as I said, is going through a golden age because of the internet. Two, there's this breaking of the mystique, the breaking down of this third wall, and seeing the musicians and just talking like a regular person. And three, the educational aspect. Thing number four, which kind of relates to thing number two, which is humanizing the experience. When we are aware of people, not in our personal life, but in our, let's call it, the macro world. If we're aware of people that we think, or if we maybe even we know do great things, we tend to see them as something other than human. If you're in business, maybe you admire or Elon Musk, or Steve Jobs. If you love singing, maybe you admire Frank Sinatra, or Enrico Caruso. If you're an operatic sort, if you're a drummer, maybe you admire Buddy Rich or Art Blakey or Bill Bruford or whoever. And they always say there's this funny slogan, don't meet your heroes, and it's kind of funny because on the one hand, it means you might have built someone up in your head, and when you meet them they might be rude or angry or disappointing. But in another sense, what it means is that these are just regular people. When Elvis Presley is eating his fried chicken at KFC, he doesn't want to be bothered necessarily. There are some people who will interrupt any event in their life to sign an autograph or shoot the shit with their fans, but a lot of them are like, hey, I'd love to talk to you when I'm done with my fried chicken, but right now I've got a drumstick in my hand and it's not the kind I play the drums with. God, that's corny, but hey, free show, no complaining allowed. So I think that the idea of sort of seeing people express some of their human side, hearing, oh yeah, that thing that I played that looks really hard, it was really hard, and it took me several takes to do it. And then we even had to edit some of them together, and I had to learn it all over again just to be able to play it live. And that might actually inspire a young musician. And again, this sort of goes back to that Corolla interview on Rogan yesterday. And Corolla said, I was it Corolla or Rogan? I think they both agreed to it, but one of them said, bad comedians are a great inspiration to aspiring comedians. And that seems somewhat counterintuitive because obviously, in any field, you want to be inspired by the best. If you want to be a great architect, you want to study someone whose building is beautiful as opposed to someone whose building falls down 3 weeks after it's erected. With a musician, you obviously want to study the best, not the worst. But this is a very interesting thing too, which again goes back to how interviews can humanize the subject. And this is that when you see Richard Pryor or George Carlin or the best of the best, you think, God, I'm not that funny, I'm not that clever, I'm not that quick, I can't deal with hecklers that seamlessly. But if you go to see a bad comedian who has the courage, because they say that doing stand up is one of the most terrifying things for most people. Some are even more terrified of that than having an encounter with a hungry beast. And so when you see someone that at least has the courage to get up on stage at an open mic night, standing there in the spotlight, angry audience, the waitress hasn't brought them enough drinks, so they're really pissed off. And at least they're trying and not getting the laughs. And there's a bit of groaning from the audience, but to at least stand there and try it. An aspiring comedian in the back of that room will think, look, if this guy can do it, I can do it too. And the other thing Rogan and Corolla said is that, and look, he said, going to these open mic nights, seeing these amateur or bad comedians, it shows that, yeah, some of these people, not all, but some will become the next generation's Pryors and Carlins and Chappelles and Chris Rocks. But very few people start out in comedy as funny and as smooth and as clever as they become after they really hone it down. Some people probably are. Some people, even in fields that seem to require the most specialization, some are probably born with an inherent understanding. There might even be some people who inherently know their way around the human anatomy so well that they can become surgeons. You didn't think I was going there. You thought I was going somewhere else, but no, I was going there. It's a sophisticated show. We don't joke about terrible bodily functions and drugs and fluids and the fact that our world's going to hell. We don't joke about that sort of thing. But I actually thought that statement that sort of part of that conversation between Rogan and Carolla was actually really important for musicians. And I think interviews can sort of help people to hear about these things straight from the horse's mouth. There's also the other point of view of, let's say you really love a piece of music that a musician made, and that a musician disses his own music. I mean, I'm a huge Genesis fan. Mike Rutherford has given interviews where it sounds like he hates 90% of everything the band has done, and yet he wrote the stuff. We're more proud of it than he is. But that just goes to show you, too, that these musicians are people like the rest of us. They have their own psychological quirks, they have their own preferences. And the other thing that it shows is that creating something isn't necessarily as fun as experiencing it. They're doing the work. And sometimes people, and I think this is more in improvisational music like jazz. Sometimes in jazz, sometimes you see musicians on stage having more fun than people in the audience, particularly if it's the more avant-garde style of jazz. But for a lot of music that requires a lot of writing and production, it can be a lot of blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And this reminds me of something David Gilmour said quite a few years ago on an interview. He said that he would love, he sort of framed it almost as a regret. He said, one thing that I'm sort of regret is that I'll never be able to be that kid hearing Dark Side of the Moon on his headphones all the way through for the first time, because I'll never be able to have that experience. I was there for the arguments. I was there for, do we mix this piano higher than the organ? Do we put the clocks in the left or the right channel? Oh God, we're having another fight again, going to the canteen for a beer. All of this sort of, the grunt work of actually making a beautiful piece of art, as opposed to just the luxury of sitting back and listening to it in that sort of idyllic setting. And so there's that as well. And that might be a message to people that, look, if you want to be a musician professionally, it's a lot of hard work and not all of it is fun. And if that's something you're not up for, maybe be content to be a member of the audience. So that's not to discourage anyone, but, they say that anyone can be famous, and if you work really really hard and always persist, unless you die at a young age because of some tragic situation, you can get places. But if you want things to go super smooth and easy, maybe you should just clean toilets, because there's no surprises. That I shouldn't say that. There's actually probably a lot of surprises in that profession. Maybe clean. What's something where you clean where there's not many surprises? Windows. Not too much surprising about a window. Oh, it's a bit of scuffed here. Yeah, with toilets, there's probably a lot of very horrible, horrible surprise. See, so much for this being, a wholesome show. Um, but so that's another reason that we love interviews. So I actually think that we're in the golden age of interviews for all of those reasons. You no longer need to pay a tuition fee to get an education. It is free on YouTube. It's free on other places online. Or you can pay a relatively cheap price to get tutorials, professional ones made by Rick Beato. This isn't an ad for him. I genuinely like what he's doing. So there's that. In terms of the journalistic aspect, it's more specialized than ever before. You don't need to rely on it being so massively popular that the CBS Morning Show, well, Dan Rather's retired, needs to do a segment on it. You can find a 2-hour interview with the semi-obscure musician of your choice online. Then there's the demystifying of it, and I think that social media and the internet has sort of humanized a lot of celebrities in general, not just popular musicians. In other words, if there's someone like Alice Cooper, who every Christmas and Thanksgiving and other times of the year goes to a homeless shelter without any fanfare or paparazzi and serves them their soup and stuff, we get to know, oh wow, Alice Cooper's actually a really nice guy. And then there's other musicians that we know, oh wow, they're really even weirder than we thought. But again, all of this is humanizing. And if you want to go into any sort of performance art, I think it helps to know that the people on stage doing these seemingly superhuman things on the other side of the third wall, they're people just like you and me. They breathe, they eat, they're happy, they're angry, they have TV shows that they like, TV shows that they don't like. Their cars get flat tires. I mean, I know cars, flat tires used to happen all the time, and now, oh, with run flat technology, but you see what I'm getting at. So We're living in a golden age of musical interviews. A lot of people like them. Imagine if someone, the king, in my view, of musical interviews, made it this far. Frank Zappa, he would probably be hosting his own interview show on the internet. He wanted Fox to produce one and they chickened out. But I think Zappa would definitely have a show online. Damn, that would have been cool. And on that note, I'll leave you. And as always, like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.